that you will find. If it was all the species, this thing would telescope out to way over there. It has the groups, the kinds. And so this is a good identification tool. These things were not drawn by us, they were drawn by Waterford Press. So that's why they're a little bit stingy about it, but they did a really good job. This one was done by Water Watch. It's handier because it's truly fully waterproof. This one, water will leak into it eventually. This one's really tough. It doesn't have all the kinds of creatures in it, and the drawings aren't quite as good, but it's still a really super good resource. And it also explains a little bit about which creatures live where and so forth, and this document does that as well. And then if you can, one of the very best resources you can get is an actual collection. So this is Carmen's collection of the actual creatures. Some of the ones that we didn't find today, we'll look in here to see them. This is something that you can make yourself. It would be a really good project for a naturalist, either an employee or a volunteer, to put together a collection like this, or you can sometimes, if you're lucky, find somebody who's willing to sell them to you. I make them and sell them, but I charge a lot because it takes a really long time to do it. KDA, or
Kentucky Division of Water,
KDW sometimes has them. Do they sell them or they just give them to you if they have them?
If you go to the KAEE, the Kentucky Association for Environmental Education Conference, a lot of times they will have them for auction there.
Okay. This is most of the different kinds of creatures you will find in Kentucky streams. Once again, not all the species, but it does have a lot of the different groups. These are little vials filled with ethyl alcohol. And if you guys want to make one of these on your own, I would help you do that for free. I would rather help you do it than make it myself. But and I can tell you where to buy the vials. And then one of the hard parts is actually making a box that works. But we have all the different, and we'll talk about some of the specific ones here. And these are all things that live right here in Kentucky. But
Creepy and cool.
Yeah, very creepy and cool. So let's talk about some of our results here.
And I would like to say, when this is a great question, Katie asked us, how long would it take to make? Look at all the things we sampled here today in this just amount of time, and if you had a group of kids and you were doing this may be a way to actually get some of those samples right now, and you probably got a good chunk of them.
Yes. If you have a good site like this, and if you bring vials with you, you can make like a decent collection in one day.
That's so cool.
And in just a few days, and maybe over a couple of years at a bunch of different sites, you can probably get everything you would need. But you can put a decent collection together in one day.
So then do you reference those and show the sites?
And show the what?
And show the sites, like, yeah, like you got those vials numbered, then you come back here and say where you found them?
I'm not sure. Oh, I see what you mean. It would be good practice to do that. Yes, to say where you collect. I don't always do that, but it would be good to say where you collected them.
Do you not do that because you already know where you can find it?
I just forget to do it, and I'm just mainly getting them just to show them to people. My presumption is that all of these creatures live in here somewhere.
Yeah, they're not rare, right?
Right, they're not rare.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But sometimes you just don't find them all.
You wouldn't have to add the locality, but for a research
yes.
collection, you would have.
It's good practice. Yeah. It's good practice to add the date, time, and who collected it. Or the date, the location, and who collected it. Yes. Okay, so who can name some creatures that we found? Just most of these things, just common names is good enough for this. For one thing, we need to start, actually, let's go ahead and take some data here. Does anybody know, I'm not from this area, so what is our river basin? Does anybody know, is this Kentucky River Basin? Or Ohio River Basin? Does this go directly into the Ohio?
Yes.
Ohio River Basin?
It goes into the Salt River.
Salt, really?
Yeah,
wow.
Salt River goes into Ohio.
And how would we find that information out?
That's a good question.
It's on the parklands.org.
It is. It goes into the Salt River. Though.
Salt River.
Well,
Does anybody know the stream name? Is this Pope Lick? Floyd's Fork. Okay. So we're writing down some data, and even this amount of information that we're taking today, even though it's the light version, can still give Division of Water useful information. If we find something really unusual today, like no mayflies, for instance, or no crayfish, that would be weird, and we wouldn't want to tell them about that. What is our date today? 8/25/18. What approximate time did we start today?
10:30. No, 9:30.
9:30. And what time is it now?
10:30.
10:20.
10:20 a.m. I'm going to put my name for supervising sampler. Organization, we'll put KY Master Naturalist, and we'll fill the rest of this stuff out later. But the most important stuff is the date, time, and location. And then the creatures. Naturalist. There we go.
It's sampling site.
And sampling site, yeah, we'll call this the Pope Lick.
Fisherville Canoe Launch.
Pope Lick, Fisherville Canoe Launch, and then you could also just put down GPS coordinates or an address. We'll talk about some of these things later, but let's go ahead and start identifying some of our creatures. What are some creatures that we talked about or that you saw? Crawfish, so that's an easy one. Most kids will know that one, so we can just check mark crawfish. That gives us 2 points already. Now, if we see any more crawfish, we can definitely talk about them and look at them, but they don't go on our score sheet anymore. So crawfish should be in just about every Kentucky stream. They can handle sort of deep water. I don't know much about their physiology to understand why they're able to tolerate a little bit less oxygen, but they can tolerate less oxygen than some of these other creatures. I don't know if they come to the surface periodically. I don't know what they do, but they are a pretty tough creature. What else did we find? Somebody say one? Damselfly nymph. Let's see if we can find that one in here again. I think it was in this container. Yeah, I think so. Here it is. I'll try to maybe even scoop it up. Yeah, it's a small one, kind of a small one. Damselflies can look like mayflies because they have 3 tails. We'll talk about the 3 tails here in a second. But damselflies are usually a little bigger. Lost it again. Damselflies are usually a little bigger, and their 3 tails are paddle-like. They're still technically a gill, but they look like, almost look like flippers. And when these things are in water, they sort of go out to their natural. So that should be on there somewhere with the sort of flattened out tail. So it has 3 tails like a mayfly. Damselflies are more of a sedentary water creature. So we consider them intermediate in the sense that they can live in not just the very most highly oxygenated water, but in a variety of different water conditions. So they are worth 2 points. They are a predator. They, as we mentioned earlier, they have this telescoping lower jaw, just like a dragonfly. These creatures are immatures. Most of the insects that we find underwater are immature creatures. If anybody has a question about any of these specific creatures as we go, please let me know. And I've dropped water all over my data sheet. And oh, here we go. Here's one that's right on here that just happened to land.
The other one's still on your hand. You've got one on.
Another one stuck on my hand. Oh, that's still the damselfly. We don't want to take them out of the water too long, or they won't do well. But this creature, does anybody remember which one this is? We can't see her tails very well right now. This is the mayfly. And this is an example of mayfly as a group. So there's many species of mayflies. Some of them don't look very much like this. Some of them have a less flattened body, but they usually have 3 tails that go out in almost like a star, one goes in this direction, like 45-degree angle, and then one goes straight down the middle when they're out in the water. These guys are highly dependent on running oxygenated water, and they have to have refuge. They have to have rocks to hide under. You can see them. I think I showed this to some people earlier. If you look real close at them, when they're in water, their gills actually move and flap on the side of their body. Do you see that? You have to look on the sides of their body.
Is it happening?
No, there's not enough water in there now. If we put them in a little cup, we would see it. Oh, we could put them in a little mussel shell or something maybe. Oh, now you can see it really well. So I like to show that to kids to show them an example of how sensitive these creatures are. Their gills and the water are almost the same thing. So the difference between their body and the chemistry of the water is very little. If you broke this thing up and pulverized it, it's basically just water with some stuff in it. So they are highly dependent on the conditions of the water
If you fit in that.
Oh yeah, she might fit in there, and then we could. So mayfly is a good one to see that. A lot of these creatures have moving gills, but it's usually easy to see on mayfly. I don't know if she's going to let me scoop her in there or not.
She thinks she's going to get a shot. She doesn't want to go.
Yeah. Oh, she's upside down, but you can actually see her gills still. You see the gills flapping?
Oh, look at your friend. Oh, yeah.
Quickly.
We actually didn't find sawbugs today. At least I didn't see any. So that's our mayfly. Mayflies, some of them are predators, some of them are detritivores. That's another lesson that you can do while you're doing this, by the way. So not only do these insects help to tell us about the water quality, this is a whole ecosystem. You've got predators, you've got detritivores, you've got higher predators like the crayfish are going to be preying on the smaller predators like small damselflies, small dragonflies. So there's a whole, it's just like the savanna where you've got the grass, which would be the broken up bits of leaves here. Then you have herbivores like some of the stoneflies, some of the mayflies, and then predators and then top predators. So there's a whole thing going on here. I'm going to check off mayfly nymphs. Do we see any other creatures?
Water pennies.
Water pennies. So water pennies are a group 1 creature. They're generally associated with pretty clean streams. I tend to find them even in urban streams though. So they're not one of the very most sensitive creatures. The water pennies, we definitely need to see those if you didn't see one.
There are a whole lot of them on the rocks on the other side of the bank.
So this is a beetle larva. They turn into a beetle that is not aquatic, and I never see the adult beetles. It's actually moving on my thumb, so it's a fully mobile creature. They have gills, but you can see the segments on their body, and they are pretty common, but really, really cool creature.
What beetle does it turn into?
And they just call it the water penny adult beetle.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm not even really sure what it looks like because I never see them. They're just sort of a dark beetle from what I remember. They would be around here, but I think they're only out for a very short period of time. So that's water penny.
Like seasonally? Or
Seasonally. I believe seasonally, yes. But I'm not sure what season it is because I've never seen one. But that's water penny. So water pennies are super cool. She's going back down under. That is another damselfly. It's a bigger one. That's a nice one. So we checked off water penny. Anything else that we saw?
The pouch snails?
Snails. Yes, we saw several snails. Rule of thumb for snails. You point them up into the air, wherever their point is. If they're one that doesn't have a point, they would be here. But if it's a one with a point, you hold it up and you look at where the hole is on the snail. So these things are spiral. So if I hold it up and if the opening is on the right side instead of the left side, this is what we call an other snail. An other snail just means a whole group of snails that are other. They are different than the pouch snail. Pouch snail is a specific snail that opens on the left. Pouch snail can tolerate almost any kind of water conditions. The other snails, which there are a whole bunch of different kinds. This is one's spiral. There's one that looks more like a sort of a traditional land snail. Those are more sensitive to water impairments, and I don't know enough about snails to know why that is. I think it has something to do with how they capture oxygen, but I'm really not sure. But I'm going to check off other snail. One of the things that we found that I don't think everybody saw, and we may not be able to find it again, is the riffle beetle. I don't know if I'll be able to see it in here again or not. Yeah, something might have eaten it. Oh, I see one. I'm just going to put it on my fingers. Scuds are pretty small. Yeah, so this is a riffle beetle. Riffle beetles are, as far as I understand it, a fully aquatic beetle.
No wonder I wasn't finding anything.
And there are some bigger ones too. But you'll see it's got the coloration on, at least on that other pamphlet there. It's got sort of the same shape and coloration as that thing. These are I don't find riffle beetles all the time. But I do sometimes find them in semi-urban, semi-impaired streams. So they aren't necessarily the most sensitive creature. But there are multiple species.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I found much larger.
They won't be that big, but there'll be some bigger ones. They'll be
almost
a little smaller than that. And there are other aquatic beetles too, but a lot of the other ones are not considered fully aquatic. And if they're not fully aquatic, they're not as dependent on water quality. There are things like diving beetles that if the water quality gets bad, they can just leave. So they're not really dependent on water quality. But this one is. This one, when the water quality changes, as far as I understand, it's fully aquatic, and it will be dead. It has a larva stage too. We probably saw some today, but we just didn't notice them because they're very small. And they're just called riffle beetle larvae. They just look like a very small worm. So we'll check off riffle beetles. That's a good sign. Anything else that we'll talk about caddis flies. So there are multiple species of caddis flies, and often what we will see instead of the caddis fly larva itself is the cases that they build. So some species build a case that looks almost like a log about this big, made of tiny pebbles. And this one makes what we call a snail shell case, which is like shaped like a snail shell, but it's made of tiny pebbles, like a mosaic. And caddis flies in general, while there are a few species that I'll find in pretty urban streams, caddis flies in general are pretty sensitive species, need lots of oxygen. I believe some of them are predators, some of them are detritivores. Lots of species, pretty difficult to identify to this family and species level, but it's actually not that bad if you have a key.
So they live inside of that?
They live inside of that. They build this. So we sometimes hear about how wonderful humans are because we use tools and build things, right? Well, bugs do that too.
Tripped out.
Do they get much larger than that?
I don't think that they do, at least not this species. But there may be some bigger ones, maybe in other places. I've never seen them much bigger than this.
What's the difference between that and a little rock if you were trying to...
It's sometimes I miss them. Luckily, usually if they're there'll be a lot of them. So you'll eventually see one. But they are, if you look real close, you'll see that spiral shape. And then you'll see the mosaic that it's made up of tiny rocks.
I don't know if you do this, Blake, but like if I pick up a rock and there's a bunch of little pebbles or things like that look like they're clumped or sticking together, then that's usually
a good indication that there's caddis flies in there. So we found caddis fly. There are also some caddis flies that don't build cases, and I believe we found one in here, but it's going to be really difficult to find it. There's probably a picture of one somewhere around here.
It's right here.
Yes. So caddis flies outside of their shells look like that, and there are some that don't really build shells, so they always look like that. And they're small. They're sometimes easily confused with some of these other creatures, and so usually, especially with kids, we just worry about the ones that build cases, and that's all that counts on this list anyway.
So this one spins a net.
The one that doesn't, or some of the ones that don't build cases spin a net instead, and they sort of build a little bit of a net around them to catch food as it's whipping by through the water, and they will sometimes have bits of rock and gunk stuck to that, so it kind of looks like they have a loose case around them, but they're not really attached to it. You can pull them out easily, where these other ones are fully inside like a snail. So we found those. We didn't find stonefly nymphs. So if y'all look at some of your pictures, you'll see I didn't see one.
I thought Wayne had one.
Did you?
He did.
Is there in one of these buckets?
That one right
Look,
there.
big
This one?
crawdad. I thought we had one in there. He didn't get away.
That would be a good one to see.
I thought we had one.
Let's set her
He
over
was
here.
not happy with me.
So like the mayflies are like this. The damselflies, they have a wider tail.
I see damselflies and mayflies.
Oh wait, what is this?
That's a damaged damselfly. If somebody sees one, let me know. Stoneflies, in my experience, are out of all of these creatures, the generally anyway, the most sensitive. And that's just, I don't know physiologically if that's true, but just in my experience going to streams, if it's a really clean like mountain stream and Robinson Forest, something like that, probably going to find stoneflies. Someplace like this, even though it looks pretty good, a lot of times I don't find stoneflies. And I'm not sure why that is. The mayfly, in general, the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies are considered the most important indicator species, but from my experience, the stoneflies are at the top of that list. They are, at least as a group, they tend to not be in urban areas at all, and I don't know why.
You want to talk about EPT taxes?
EPT, yes. So when professionals do this, sometimes they ignore all these other creatures that we've talked about today and just look at mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, and they call that EPT, which is from their scientific order names. Mayflies are Ephemeroptera, stoneflies are Plecoptera, so EP, and caddisflies are Trichoptera, which is T. So the professionals a lot of times will just look at those because those are considered the most sensitive and the best indicator species. And when they find a crawdad or one of these other things, they'll just shove it out of the way and just look at the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. But of course, we're talking to the public, and it's good for them to know about these other creatures too.
So just a question about kind of, because they tend to be most sensitive to oxygen.
Yes.
It's a very narrow way to look at it, but are there ways not just to test oxygen level?
Yes.
Obviously, there's more things that go into it. You need to have probably healthy.
Right.
You know,
you have to have habitat and that kind of thing too.
Right. But is it just oxygen primarily? And
oxygen is a big part of it, but like I said, it's also the stream bed, the habitat. That's a big part of it too.
Right.
If the oxygen is perfect, if it's no pollution, or at least no chemical pollution, but if there's sediment covering all the rocks, you can't have, most of these creatures can't live there.
Okay, right.
So oxygen doesn't tell the whole story. What will a lot of times happen is they'll do a critter test first, and if they see something unusual, then they'll bring in the big guns and start doing chemical testing.
So another thing, if you do a lot of work like in the eastern part of the state, and eastern, like when we look at the, I don't know, I guess probably Jackson, Pikeville type of area, then you really got to start to worry about conductivity. So that's another factor that goes in there. So here, because of our limestone geology, our conductivity is still going to be pretty high, right? We'd probably be somewhere between 500-800 microsiemens. Conductivity. When you get into eastern Kentucky, it's very different. We're in a sandstone system. A lot of those species there are much more adapted to low conductivity.
Wow.
So you get to 500, what might be normal here, you see them gone.
Wow.
So when you start looking, we'll talk about conductivity. So just the ability of water to carry an electric current. So it's called conductivity. So you look at your cations and anions of the water. So things like calcium, magnesium, things like that add up. That's a big part of it here. Sulfate is a big one for, in eastern Kentucky because a lot of the geology and the mining. But there, conductivity is a big indicator in a certain part of that area. So if we have conductivity that we had here, we probably wouldn't find a lot of these.
No, interesting. Does everybody remember what this creature is? The one that bit me earlier? Dragonfly nymph. I associate dragonfly nymphs will definitely live in streams. They tend to be very common in ponds. They're sort of more of a sedentary water kind of creature, but there's always some sedentary water or ponded water in streams, so they usually live there too. But you can find a lot of them in ponds. There's many species of dragonflies. They're sort of characterized by having a stout body, no obvious long tails, and then they'll have 3 legs because they're an insect. And then they have, like we talked about earlier, the telescoping mandible that comes out. So these guys are predators. They're worth 2 points because, like I said, they're not as dependent on oxygen and some of these other factors, but we'll check her off. We didn't find cranefly larvae. Let me show you her. Cranefly larvae are super. Oh, we have a question?
Oh, how long do they take to mature?
Oh, the dragonflies, I think it depends on species, but it can take, I think, as long as a year, and sometimes a little less than that, sometimes even maybe more than a year in some of these cases. They're down there for a while, and then the water's cool, so that sort of slows down their development, but it can be a while. This is a cranefly larva. We didn't find one today. They're probably in here somewhere. These guys I tend to find in packed up dead leaves underwater, or sometimes even on the banks, like where the water is soaking up into the dead leaves. This is the immature stage of the big craneflies, which are creatures that look like giant mosquitoes. These guys are, I tend to find them in pretty clean water, even though they're considered a level 2 thing here. But they probably live in more impaired streams as well. But I tend to find a lot of them in very healthy streams.
So they eat, are they detritivores?
Yes, they're detritivores. So they're huge, and when you find one of these, you can let them walk around in the kids' hands, and they're really creepy and cool looking, totally harmless, but really neat.
And so those turn into, that's what the big mosquitoes?
Yes.
Those are called crane flies?
Crane flies.
What's a mayfly look like?
So mayfly, I don't know if we have a good picture of an adult mayfly. They kind of look like a dragonfly, except a little smaller and more delicate.
Oh, they fly like a dragonfly?
No, they don't fly as well as dragonflies do, and a lot of times they sit. They flutter a little bit, yeah. You will see them, I almost never see them, but you guys who live around big rivers, you will sometimes see them.
Science center, they will
Yeah.
overtake you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You run
Yeah,
because they're it's like a flock.
Yeah.
I've driven through a herd of mayflies before.
Yes, they say that it will cause car accidents in some places. Yeah, there can be so many of them. Yeah, in some of the northern states, they'll run into that sometimes.
One of the lakes, I was crossing a causeway over one of the big lakes. And it was just a big swarm.
Whoa,
That's a native.
Forest flies,
And it
right?
was like it does.
I didn't know we had a